All right, guys. Here with me today is Dr. Sven Bourquin. Sven and I, we've been working together for quite some time, decades by now, I believe. But yeah, thanks for coming to class today. And why don't you introduce yourself?
All right, Turov. Yeah, okay, so as Turov said, my name's Dr. Sven Bourquin. Turov says a little bit differently to me because he's German, but that's my name. I started in Botswana in beginning of 2003, I believe, to come in and do my PhD on crocodiles. We looked at the general ecology of crocodiles with a team of about 4 people permanently. We had volunteers come in and assist us with our work. So we lived in tents on the Okavango River, near the border of the Namibia on the Caprivi Strip for must have been nearly 5 years. Then went and wrote up and came back immediately, and did that through the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa. Came back, wrote a management plan for crocodiles, and then worked for 2 years on leopard, also in Botswana, with an organization that looked at the predator guilds, which obviously include leopard, lion, hyena, wild dog, and cheetah. After that, I formed a company that did environmental consulting, looking at environmental management plans and things like that, and then also in Botswana. And then from there I joined Rhinos Without Borders. We actually formed Rhinos Without Borders and brought rhinos into Botswana and donated them to the government, mainly from South Africa, which was at that point considered a poaching hotspot for rhinos and still is. And so we brought those rhinos into Botswana to establish another source population. And I'm still with Rhinos Without Borders.
Okay, cool. So for this block in my class, we've spoken about 2 major things, and I started it off with the role of science in conservation. And you and I, we've had multiple discussions about this over the course of the year, how science informs management or policy making and how it doesn't. And then we've also spoken about species conservation in particular. So when it comes to the role of science, generally what comes to mind when you hear the role of science and conservation? What comes to mind? Like just
for me, so first of all, conservation. If any organization has a mandate to manage their wild populations, and to make decisions that are best tailored to protect those animal populations, you need to be asking, first of all, the right questions. What needs to be done? What actions do you need to take? Where do you not need to take action? And those questions are answered through science. Science is an ongoing and dynamic process, and we never stop learning. A lot of the time through our mistakes, through things that we've maybe not got completely wrong, but where we could improve on our management styles, and science feeds directly into that. So most projects, and I'm thinking now in terms of the croc research that we did, tell us about that crocodile population. And remember, a lot of the times the populations that you're dealing with and the specific areas you're dealing with have specific problems associated with them for that population, although generally conservation of animals has very broad issues that are generally worldwide. So especially with this crocodile population, there was overhunting, and we were looking at ways to assess the population size in the habitat that they are, which is a unique habitat, and then look at methods to first of all mitigate human-wildlife conflict, to assess the health of the population. So through answering those questions, you come up with solutions that at that time are best suited to dealing with the mitigation of problems associated with the population health.
No, that's good. So crocodiles are a good example. So crocodile is an apex predator in this particular aquatic ecosystem. And crocodiles live in water, obviously, and water is connected to hydrology, etc., etc. And we have had these discussions in the past. What is the role of baseline research play? Like knowing something about what your general environmental conditions are, what your flow rates are in your ecosystem, what your contaminant levels are, etc., etc. How important is this? And do you have the feel that we are at a point here where we are well set, or is there more that needs to be done?
Turolf, there's always more that needs to be done. Like I say, you know, these processes are dynamic, and we make decisions based on the information that we have at hand. Because a system like the Okavango Delta, like the Kavango River that goes through the Capivi Strip and into Angola, is a constantly changing environment, and we've noticed over the last 20 odd years that we've both been here, that those systems change, either through natural processes or through unnatural processes. So the answers that we got 15 years ago at the conclusion of the crocodile research project may not necessarily suit the problems that we're picking up now, because the problems change as well as the habitat type. So since we stopped doing the research, we've been back a few times to for example, look at mercury levels. Mercury levels alone will change a population because they affect fertility at high enough concentrations. So mercury is a contaminant that is not biologically active when it's dry. It can move through aerosol format, so can settle anywhere over a few years. With our system that floods every 6 months or so, to varying degrees, that mercury can sit in an area for a long time, accumulate, and then get wet when it floods, and that mercury, when it's flooded and built up, is biologically active.
Ah, that's interesting. I've never really seen it from that point of view. And crocodiles, there's something interesting about crocodiles that a lot of people don't know. In a crocodile nest, the temperature in the nest essentially determines the sex of the crocodile. Is that true?
Yes, that's true.
So what comes to mind when you hear the word climate change, global warming, and this kind of stuff? What comes to mind to somebody that deeply cares about crocodiles?
Yeah, so we know that crocodilians physiologically have remained relatively unchanged for the last 230 million years, probably to 330 million years. And this process of evolution has kept them in that form for that long, for a reason. When you consider that the crocodiles here, so if we have the incubation period for 90 days, the middle 10 days of that incubation period determines the sex, and that is on the average temperature of the nest. So between 32 and 34 degrees Celsius, I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, we get male crocodiles, and below that and above that, to a certain point, we get females. So if you have a nest between 32 and 34 degrees, in the middle 10 days, you're going to have males hatching. When you think about climate change and global warming and a non-constant climate, which is often associated with a very variable climate, you can disrupt the dynamics of the population in terms of male female.
They're changing the sex ratio.
Yeah, changing the sex ratio, and that has huge implications. As it is, you might get 2 crocodiles out of 1,000 eggs laid that survive to adulthood and survive to the point where they can breed, and having additional factors and limitations placed on crocodile populations doesn't make it any easier for them.
That's interesting, and that crocodilians, I guess all of that what you just said holds true for our, I would always say, American audience says crocodilians, which are alligators, and I think one species of crocodile or whatever, doesn't matter. This holds true for the United States as well.
It does.
It does.
It does.
All right. Now, so you're saying, so I'm hearing between the lines that baseline research is important, generally.
Yes.
So because of the ever-changing conditions, that for whatever reasons these conditions happen, but the baseline conditions change, and decisions need to be made in an informed way, and therefore we do need things like or data points on contamination of water, or the hydrological conditions, our soil conditions, our plant conditions, etc., etc. And so that is important, but, and I've stressed that in our lecture a little bit, or I tried without being too judgmental, is very often funding goes to iconic species. And to a large degree, in a very, very understandable way, because it's almost a product that one sells in order to get money for conservation. How do you see that as somebody? Because if we're taking a model of a food pyramid, all of that stuff we talked about makes the food pyramid, nutrients, etc. It's not even included here, really. So, and then our plant level forms the first part, and then very often, if we look at lions, etc., they are, if we use that pyramid model, would be standing on the top. So, but money is often not available for what is on the bottom. So, how do you see that, or what is your opinion on that? That's obviously my opinion, because that's what I do, and you have looked after leopards and things like this that stand on the top of the pyramid. How do you see that, and if so, what would be a good solution, maybe, or something to consider? We're not going to save the world here, but
Yeah, no. Look, I've always up to the point where I've worked on rhino, I've always worked on predators. So I think it's great. No, I think you raise a very valid point, and you can't, you don't start eating your salad by picking the leaves. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of work that goes into getting your answers, and I believe that it's the responsibility of scientists to not only get answers around their specific the projects that they do, but also to extend a little bit out and think about what happens around the subject. So, with the crocodiles, we weren't just catching crocodiles. We were measuring water levels. We were doing water temperatures. We were, air temperature. Those sort of baseline components were important for us to be able to determine why crocodiles were doing certain things at certain times. It is always a pity that iconic species like lions have been studied to the moon and back. And my opinion of that is not that it's wrong that they have been so studied, because lion, as I said earlier, these populations behave differently in different places. So I believe there's still a lot of information that we need to learn about lions, for example, and elephant and rhino and all of that stuff. Quite often, when you're looking at an apex predator as an umbrella species, as possibly an ecosystem, what's the word I'm looking for? A bioengineer.
The keystone species,
a bioengineer. So things like elephant that have, and hippos that have the ability to transform their landscapes. That kind of work is important because of their top-down effects. Having said that, your statement about the bottom-up effects on trophic levels is very valid. That forms the basis of everything that you do. You talk about people doing research on apex predators, which is the tip of the pyramid at the top trophic level. That huge broad base at the bottom is what supports everything. So without knowledge of what's happening at the bottom, you can't understand what's happening at the top.
No, that's a very valid point. I mean, I know that it's like our opinion have never been really that different. We've been talking about this kind of stuff for years. When it comes to species and their importance in an ecosystem, I mean, I made a point in class where I stated pretty brutally that if it is not necessarily the case that if we lose any species in an ecosystem, that these ecosystems are going to collapse. Different species have different importance, different functions to fulfill in ecosystems, and sometimes one species function is just going to simply be taken over by another, and especially in very, very complex ecosystems. So how about the idea of protecting rather large areas where we can house an entire ecosystem, but wherever the boundary of an ecosystem lies here? But isn't it better to focus on the remaining rather large areas that we have in the world that are somewhat less disturbed? Let's put it that way. How do you see that, instead of putting a lot of emphasis and focus and money on a lot of very small pockets on a global scale?
I completely agree. The human race is it feels like it's in a race to destroy itself by taking habitats over. We are one of the species that has the ability to change our system to suit us. We build houses, we build factories, we build all of the infrastructure that supports us. Animals that exist in the wild, for the most part, don't do that. They exist within the limitations that are the natural system. Okay. Conservation, I believe, is now heading to the point where people are trying to expand their natural habitats. As you say, in a complex system, you have several different species that will perform a very similar role, and if one of those species go extinct or locally extinct, that role will be taken over by another species up to a certain point. Okay. You talk about browsers and grazers and animals that perform those functions. You can get to a point where you lose that function, and it's the function that's important, not necessarily the species. So an ecosystem is going to exist regardless of how many animals are there. It's just going to change. By increasing the size of areas of natural habitats, you take away a lot of the necessity to manage those populations intensively. If you look at a small pocket of land, we talk about lethal control when populations become too high of a certain species because their predators may not exist in that area. And as landscapes become larger and larger, natural populations can manage themselves and are self-limiting. So to me, the obvious solution is by increasing your area in which these populations can survive and the ecosystem can function as close to naturally as possible. There are very few natural ecosystems.
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to go to natural, whatever the definition of natural is.
Yeah.
So, because I'm always of the point of view, it's like, let's take a lot of money and put it onto large systems and put a very, very strong focus on continuous systems as we see them to a large extent in the United States still till today, the northern parts of the northern hemisphere. Here in Botswana, I mean, we're certainly blessed with some of the largest continuous wilderness systems that remain in the world. So, I mean, that was always the point I wanted to raise. But going back to the very beginning of our class, people, and that will always be people in a system, adjacent to a system, and people will always affect these, and especially local populations. And something I would really like to talk about in class a little bit later is how international decisions are often influenced by people/countries that are not affected with these conservation outcomes on the ground. What is your opinion generally on that? If the United States, England, Germany, France, or whoever makes a decision on the rules how trades are handled, what is your opinion on that?
Well, my initial opinion is that you need powerful nations to be able to step in where mistakes are being made, provided that they are armed with the necessary information and they are making use of scientists and people that are on the ground in the affected areas that have local knowledge, that know what's going on in the area, and have the capacity to be able to do what needs to be done. Unfortunately, I think quite often, rules and regulations need to be put in place at a bigger level. I think quite often countries, especially poor countries with large populations of impoverished people, struggle. Conservation and maintaining your natural populations is a luxury. It's a luxury in many areas where you have these large starving populations and large struggling populations that live from day to day with limited resources. People, especially in places like here in Botswana, natural resource collection is a huge thing. So that's why with local knowledge, with the ability to and I believe you're referring to things like the CITES.
It's on the list.
Yeah. Those regulations should be put in place. They should be adhered to. With those regulations, most of the time the countries themselves need to sign into that agreement. Unfortunately, again, quite often you have the case where the country itself is not able or willing. There might be a lack of political will to follow the tenets that have been put forward by those structures. That's how I see it. I think again, every system is unique. Every to a more or lesser degree. You have global issues that don't change, but local issues that are probably quite dynamic and do change. And as long as you are able to keep track of what's happening in an environment, a dynamic environment, adhering to those regulations that are set at a higher level I don't think can ever be a bad thing.
Yeah, so as one last thing, so when I speak to my students, I always get feedback. It's like, oh man, this is so cool, this is such a cool job you have, and you look at often people like you and says like, wow man, that is that is the job I want to do. But if we look back, I mean, it has taken me 30 years to get where I am, and it has taken two about the same amount of time. What message do you have for somebody at a university anywhere that wants to be involved in conservation?
Okay. Well, I mean, I assume that, at the point where you're at university and studying subjects, maybe not as an undergrad, but certainly as a postgrad, you generally know what field you're going to go into. A lot of people struggle with that decision, kind of at school level, when they're still learning about different things. I was lucky enough never to have any doubts about what I wanted to do and what I was going to do. My family was always involved in conservation. So definitely, once you know what you want to do, you've got to pin your ears back and go for it. You can't sit around and hope that somebody's going to give you your dream job or that you're going to end up where you want to be. You actively have to work at it. It's taken both you and I, 30 years of hard work to get to where we are now. We made the choice of going for a job that whose satisfaction comes from the fact that we are doing what we love doing. We feel that's important work. I mean, especially education is incredibly important, and conservation work along the lines of what I do, I feel is incredibly important, and that's where the job satisfaction comes. If you work hard and you follow the plan that you set out for yourself, and don't waver from it, and just keep working hard and stay passionate about what you're doing, you'll eventually get to where you've got to go. And that's not to say that there are not going to be failures along the way, and then there are not going to be disappointments.
Yep.
And and things that are difficult to deal with. There's never something that's all good. There's negative and positive in everything that we do, in every career that we have. For me, it might be losing animals to poaching, or problems with the aeroplane, or things that can affect your outlook. But keep your eye on the prize. Keep your eyes focused on where you want to be, and what you want to do, and there's no limit to what you can do if you work hard enough at it and you keep trying.
All right, cool. So you're the second person I met that says I love my job. I'm the first one.
Yeah, I love my job.
All right, guys. So for today, that's it. And see you later. Thanks, man.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.